8:19 right now. Welcome back to Fox 43 Morning News. State House representatives returned to Harrisburg today. Major discussions already underway regarding statewide school masking orders, and the man overseeing it all joins us this morning on the Fox 43 Capitol Beat. Always great to have Speaker of the House Bryan Cutler from Lancaster County on the program. Good morning, sir. How are you doing?
Good morning. Great. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing well, thank you. Obviously, a lot we want to get into on the administration's mask orders. I want to start with something, though, which you brought forward on Tuesday, a package of 12 bills, all discussing rules against lobbyists. We're talking transparency, influence, ethics. 12 bills, that's a lot. We're going to put something up on the screen as well. And I don't mean to come off as sounding rude in asking this, so my apologies in advance, but why should my neighbor or a friend who doesn't know the first thing about lobbying care about lobbying reform?
Well, I think lobbying reform is very important for a variety of reasons. When I worked on the lobbyist reform law about 15 years ago, I kind of coined a saying that said, if you believe in the process, you won't believe in the product. So this package—
kind of like how the sausage is made, so to speak.
Exactly. That's a good analogy. This package really just builds on what we did 15 years ago in terms of disclosure and public access. And, the piece that has my name on it deals specifically with a resolution of the Supreme Court. The reason for that is because lobbyists are actually grouped into two different kinds of lobbyists. There are lobbyists, and then there are lobbyists who are also lawyers, and the court oversees them. And the resolution of the court would simply say, we'd like it if you apply the same standards to the lawyers that we do to the non-lawyer lobbyists. That's important because when you leave the legislature currently, if you're not a lawyer, you have to have like a cooling off period of approximately 1 year. And the court does not hold the attorneys to that same level. And we're simply asking them to do that.
Got it. All right. I want to get kind of move this forward and talk about a letter which you came out in support of yesterday, written by your Republican colleagues in the House Health Committee, sent to the Commonwealth Joint Committee on Documents. And they claim that the health secretary's mask order for schools creates a new rule. Is that essentially, and that rules are only what the General Assembly can make? Is that essentially what this is? Am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah, there's one piece that I think we need to add, and that's this. All of the prior health orders were written in conjunction with an emergency order previously. As you and your viewers might recall, the Constitution was amended regarding the Emergency Powers Act last spring, and this order was written as a standalone. I believe the law, as the committee heard, their position is that the law can only be passed by the General Assembly and signed by the governor. And anything that a department does is essentially a regulation and has to go through the regulatory process. This committee, which is made up of 11 members, essentially is the legislative check on the regulatory process. And they're asking them to take a look from a procedural standpoint. This isn't, are you for masks or against masks or for or against any of the regulations that would come out through this process. It's simply, did the administration follow the law that they were supposed to? And unfortunately, we have a history all through the pandemic where the administration classically overreached beyond what the law may have allowed. And then ultimately, they may have pulled back a little bit, or we changed the law to support the position of the public.
Well, the disease prevention and control law, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to, the disease prevention and control law specifically states that if there is a disease that requires isolation or quarantine, the health department has the power to appropriate control measures. Making a mask order wouldn't apply to that, you're saying?
Well, you're starting to get a little bit into the policy arguments of whether or not it's the right thing to do. All this letter simply says is, did they follow the rules? Since it's not a law, they would have to go through the regulatory process. And Chairman Frankel spoke about the regulatory process. The normal regulatory process can be somewhat lengthy. What he failed to disclose yesterday was there is an emergency regulatory process, which this administration has used in other instances that could be used. So it's not a question of whether or not the policy is good or the power exists. Did they follow the rules? The committee obviously believes they did not, and those on the Documents Committee will review that.
Democrats have said that Republicans in the General Assembly are getting in the way of public health. What is your response to that, and what do you feel a legislator's role should be in protecting the health of children?
Well, I do think that we all have the same goals in mind in terms of how do you protect children, how do you, ensure that the economy reopens, and how do we manage this pandemic going forward. The voters spoke very clearly back in May that they wanted the legislature to be involved, and that was in large part due to the consistent overreach of the administration with the emergency orders and the closures. So our role is, one, to work with the governor and work through those processes, whatever they may be. We're returning next week to extend and work on the disaster related to the hurricane. That declaration is set to expire, and we need to ensure that we can continue to get federal aid. In regards to the ongoing COVID pandemic, which is another emergency order that terminated previously, we've continued to work on issues with the administration, namely the regulatory waivers, essentially making it easier for people to operate during the pandemic. We're looking to extend those again when we return. And we're also looking to make some other changes in the law, and we'll keep working with the governor and the Senate on that. But the reality is, anytime that we have these discussions, just like we have to follow a process, we have to consider a bill 3 days in the House, 3 days in the Senate, the governor can sign or veto. The departments have to also follow the law. It's the position of the committee that they did not.
Do you support what's going on with the state Senate right now in a constitutional amendment which would limit the Secretary of Health's powers? Do you support that?
Well, in terms of the Secretary of Health, and I think you're specifically referring to the Disease Prevention and Control Law, it does need rewritten in light of the passage of the constitutional amendment. So I do support that. Obviously, we're going to have a long debate on what the different components are, because if you take the Secretary and the department's current position that says they can issue a mask order absent an emergency, that actually also means that they could potentially close businesses, just like they did with the emergency orders back at the beginning of the pandemic. And I don't believe anybody would actually interpret the law to give them that much power. Additionally, there was a policy disagreement. And again, we're talking procedure in terms of the review of how this order was written and how it was provided to the schools.
Got it.
And the policy side, though, there is a real question of where do those powers extend? Is it to those who are ill, to those who have been exposed, or to everybody in the citizenry? And that's a legitimate policy debate that belongs in the legislature, not made in a bureaucrat's office.
Speaker Cutler, really do appreciate your time. As always, thank you for joining us on the Fox 43 Capitol Beat. You have a great day.
Thank you, Matt. You as well.
All right, we'll be right back.